No matter how many people you might be surrounded by or how many acquaintances you have, 70% of men report being lonely, and over 85% of men don't have a 3 a.m. friend that they could call in an emergency. And those stats really tell us the truth that men are going at this alone. The drift feels very lonely.
Love the work that you're doing. You're impacting a lot of lives out there in a really net positive way from my perspective. I've spent hours now over the past week listening to your different podcasts, on your podcast, you as a guest. And these are really important, things that we're talking about here, and like how we show up and create value in the home as a father with our kids and the communities, all of it. So that's something I'm super passionate about. And in going through your book, you've set it up in 4 different sections. You've kind of got setting the stage, and then you get into husband, father, leader. And as part of setting the stage, what led you to start the Dad Edge podcast and all of the associated amazing communities that are popping up around it?
Thank you so much. I joke about this a lot, and I was on John Bernthal's podcast, who's the AKA the Punisher. He's a A-list celebrity, and I was on his podcast called The Real Ones, and he told me in an email when he invited me that he was a huge fan of my show and he listens to every single episode, and I was like, oh my gosh, like that's like one of the biggest compliments I think I've ever heard. But so I thought he kind of knew the story of the catalyst to this whole thing. So he asked me the same question on The Real Ones, and it's actually pinned. The video snippet is pinned on my Instagram. If you just go at the Dad Edge, you'll see it right there at the top, just because it's so funny. So he asked me that question, and I said, it was a Sunday morning about 10 years ago, and I woke up early and I opened up the window and the sunlight hit my face, and suddenly it was like divine intervention that I knew everything there was to know about being a good dad and husband. And I just had to share it with the world. And the look on this guy's face was priceless. And he was just like, and I was like, dude, I'm totally kidding, man. Come on. He was like, what? Oh, bro. I was like, what? He's like, come on, man. He's like, and he went on and on and on. But yeah, and we both got a good laugh of it. And, but it didn't happen that way. And I'll share kind of a long genesis story to this, but I'll try to make it as succinct as I can, because it really started when I was a kid, to be honest with you, if I'm really honest with myself, and it was a roller coaster ride. So my mom and bio dad were married in, I think, 1971. They got married pretty young at 21, and then they had me 4 years later in 1975. And then after that, they went through a really, really bad, ugly divorce. And my dad left our family, and I have no recollection of my dad in those years. Obviously, the audio video doesn't get turned on. I was about 5 years old, I think, when I started realizing what a dad was. I think I was in preschool, kindergarten age, and I remember dads coming to pick up my friends from school, and some dads wore suits and some wore jeans, but I knew what a dad was. I knew I didn't have one, but to be honest, it didn't bother me at all, because my definition of dads and how they even come about is like we're magically, just appear on the porch by the stork, because I'm 51 and I remember that in cartoons. And I thought moms just, at one point, they just go out and find dads and they just come into the picture. And my mom told me one Friday, I'll never forget it. She's like, hey, I'm having a friend over for dinner tonight. He's a really special friend. I work with him and we're really getting to know each other. And I want you to meet him. He's coming over for dinner tonight. And that was my mom's way of being like, hey, I've been dating somebody in the workplace, and it's now is the awkward time for you to meet him. So I'll never forget it, man. He walked in my house, and that was the first man besides my grandfather, who I was very close with growing up, walked in my house, and he was like wearing this trench coat and a 3-piece suit, and he was carrying a briefcase. He was a white collar data software engineer and really smart guy. And I saw this guy come in, and I was like, whoa. I was like, that's a dad. That's got to be the dad. Like, that's what I said to myself. And like, literally the first words that this guy heard coming out of my mouth as I shook his hand is, are you going to be my dad? And I was just like beaming. And I think my mom, I think I remember her like gasping, like, and he just laughed. But I think my mom really kind of took that as like a Jerry Maguire moment. If you're as old as I am, you remember that movie where, Tom Cruise, he gets a hug from the little kid as he picks up Renee Zellweger from the date. And she just like has this epiphany, like, oh my God, like I got to get this kid a dad and I got to bring a man into this house. Little Ray needs a dad. And I think my mom really fell into that. And I don't know if she ever really loved him, but I think she loved the idea of having a family. And 6 months later, they were walking down the aisle, they got married, and it was awesome. Like I remember even being in the wedding, and my mom was able to quit her job, and he moved in, and I was like, this is awesome. And it was awesome for like a year. And then after that, like, I just remember a lot of drinking and a lot of fighting, a lot of physical abuse from my dad. My last name is actually his. My bio dad's last name is not mine. He adopted me legally. And, I called him dad right from the get go. And there was a lot of abuse, a lot of beatings, a lot of drunkenness. Yeah, he beat up on my mom a lot. He beat up on me a lot. The cops were called to my house multiple times for domestic violence because the neighbors would hear things going on. And then when I was about 10, I kind of knew that their relationship was coming to an end, but he moved out, they got divorced, and I've never seen him since. And I found out about 15 years ago he actually passed away, and never saw him again. And I remember being 10, I knew about the birds and the bees at that point, and I remember feeling like, well, I'm relieved that there's going to be no more fighting, but what does this mean? Like, a lot of my friends have dads. I don't have a dad now, and kind of come from this weird broken home because divorce was common, but not as common as it is now. And I asked my mom a lot of questions. I'm like, wait a second, like, where did I come from? Like, who do I have another dad out there? And she laid it on me. She's like, yeah, I was actually married before Joe. That was my dad's name. And she's like, you have a dad out there. And I was like, well, who is he? Like, what does he look like? Where does he live? And she's like, I don't know. She's like, here's a wedding album. This is what he looks like. And his name's Larry Boyd. And I was like, okay. So, my mom continued to date. 2 years passed by. I'm 12 years old at this point. I go up to the YMCA to go play basketball with one of my friends. And as soon as I get the ball, the basketball handed to me by the clerk behind the counter, he looks over my shoulder and I hear him say to another clerk, here comes Mrs. Boyd with the hockey payment for the month. And I was like, Boyd. I was like, wow, that's my dad's last name. And I go, hockey payment. I was like, Boyd. I was like, hockey payment. I was like, what do you mean? I was like, he's like, oh, her husband plays hockey up here. She's coming in to make a payment. And I was like, what's her husband's name? And the clerk kind of looks at me. He's like, his name's Larry. And I'm like, I'll never forget even the way the guy said it. He's like, his name's Larry. And I was like, holy crap, dude, that's my dad's name. So I go up to my friend and I was like, hey, man, we're going to sit here for a second. And I was like, I think this woman coming in is married to my dad. And of course, he was like, what? And I was like, yeah. So she comes in, makes the hockey payment. I'm just like waiting there. And she goes to walk out and I tap her on the shoulder. I'm like, hey, I was like, what's your name? And she like looks at me totally puzzled. And she's like, my name's Lisa. Why? And I was like, are you married to a guy named Larry? And she said, yeah. And I go, I'm just like a little kid. And I go, I think you're married to my dad. And then suddenly like her face, like just, she knew exactly who I was. And she's like, oh my gosh. She's like, sweetheart, are you Larry? And I was like, I am. And she goes, yeah, I'm married to your dad. I know exactly who you are, sweetheart. She was so kind, just so actually so receptive to it. It had to hit her like a wrecking ball. And she's like, sweetheart, would you like to talk to your dad? And I was like, oh my gosh, I would love to talk to my dad. And she goes, follow me. And we went inside. She put a quarter in the payphone and calls home. And she's like, hey, I'm up here at the YMCA. I just made the hockey payment. I just ran into your 12-year-old son. He'd like to talk to you. And she just like hands the phone right over. And she did it in a very respectful way. And I don't remember what we said, but I just remember hearing this guy's voice on the other end. And I was like, oh my gosh, like he was so humbled and didn't know what to say. And I didn't either. And, but we decided that I was like, can we meet? I would love to meet you. And he's like, I would love that. Go home and talk to your mom about it though. I did. My mom wasn't happy about it. She was kind of shocked, but wasn't happy. But we ended up meeting. And that meeting was like euphoric, man. We ate lunch together. He took me to an arcade. Like it was just awesome. And I that turned into like a 6-month relationship. And after like 5 months or so, like that last month, it just kind of got weird and distant. And I remember calling him one day and just asking him like, hey, like, is everything okay with us? Like, I feel like something's not right. I probably said it in a really 12-year-old way. And I don't remember what he said, but that was the end of our relationship. And I think the theme of it was, hey, it's me, it's not you. Um, you know, I I can't do this right now. He was married, had a 2-year old and another one on the way. And I took that really hard, man. And just kind of gave up on school. I actually failed the 8th grade. The next year I had to do 8th grade twice, not because I wasn't smart enough, but just because I think I just kind of gave up. I was like, whatever. My mom continued to date like these horrific men, toxic, abusing men, and got married. She actually got married for a third time when I was about 18. And I moved out at 17. There was just a lot of chaos going on, and spent my last 6 months in senior year living at a friend's house on the couch. And then I went away to school after that, and never been home since, never lived there anyway. But something really fascinating happened fast forward to I was 30. I was married for 3 years at the time, married my college sweetheart. And I was in a Starbucks and I was there for a business meeting. I was in medical device sales. And I was one of the people on my team was this woman who I was actually really good friends with outside of work. Her and her husband and me and Jessica, my wife, would spend a lot of time together. We'd go out on double dates all the time. So she kind of knew this story. And we're sitting in the Starbucks having a team meeting. And all of a sudden, this guy walks in. And I look up at this guy and I'm like, I knew exactly who he was. I was like, holy crap, that's my dad. There he was again, 18 years later. And the woman that I was friends with saw this look on my face, I think, and she's like, "Are you okay? Like, you look like you're just seeing a ghost." And I was like, I think I have. And I was like, "You're not going to believe this, but my dad just walked in here." And she's like, "Wait, what?" She's like your bio dad, like the one you hadn't seen since you were 12. I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, "Where is he?" And I pointed to him. I was like, "He's over there." He's like 25, 30 feet away. He didn't see me. I saw him. And she's like, "Oh my God, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to say?" And I was like, I'm not saying anything, nothing. She's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." She's like, "You're just going to let your dad walk out of here without saying anything to him?" I was like, "Yeah." I was like, I was pretty bitter. I was like, the guy doesn't deserve my time. I want nothing to do with him. Well, she took it as a way to go take an opportunity. And she just got up from the table, didn't say another word. And she went and sat at his table. And I was like, what is she doing? And my heart was racing. I was like, what is about to happen? And all of a sudden, like, he stood up, we made eye contact, and he comes walking over to my table very humbly. He extends his hand, shakes it. I didn't even get up. I shook his hand sitting down, which I usually don't do. And he's like, can I have a seat? And I was like, sure. And he saw my wedding band. He's like, "Are you married?" I was like, "Yeah." And then he asked the woman that I was with, he's like, "Are you guys married?" I was like, "No, we work together." I was like, "I've been married for 3 years. We're actually expecting our first son." And then small talk turned into a little bit of more small talk. And then he's like, "We should get together. We should go to breakfast or something." And I'm like, I kind of looked at him and I was like, "I'll tell you what, man." At the time, it was 2005. I flipped my business card over to him. I was like, "Here's my contact info, man." I was like, "You want to get in touch with me, you can do it." I was like, and I basically, the message was, "I'm not reaching out to you. I'm not even going to try." And 3 days went by and I was kind of like, I knew it. And then I get this long, long email just filled with humility and ownership and a lot of regret. And he just humbly asked, "Can we please, try this again? I really want to get to know you." And I was like, "I guess so." So I took him out. We went out to breakfast. That breakfast has now turned into a 21-year relationship. He's still married to the exact same woman, has been for 45 years. I have two younger half brothers. My kids don't know any different. They know him as grandma and grandpa. And I think that's where it started. But the darkest place that dad had started, and I'll finish here. My oldest was 6, and my youngest at the time was 4. I have 4 boys, but at the time we had 2. And I made 3 promises to myself when I got married. I'm going to be a good husband. I'm going to be a good dad, and I'll never hit my kids out of anger. And Lee, I broke all 3 of those promises. I was not a good husband. I didn't do anything abusive or terrible. I was like, but I really wasn't there. I was like half in, half out. I was just terrible at everything, communication and connection. And my kids, I was short on patience, like I always was. Like they didn't really know me really well, and I didn't really know them. I was just kind of like existing. And Dad Edge got started because my 4-year-old, who's 18 now, stepped out of line one night, and I reacted in like a moment's notice. And I turned him around, I swatted him on the butt, I spanked him. And as soon as I spanked him, I knew exactly what I did, but it got worse. Excuse me. Um, he fell. He fell down face first after I hit him. And luckily he didn't get hurt, but like he scared the bejesus out of him. He started crying. And I knew exactly what I did in that moment. I went to pick him up and he saw me coming to pick him up and he literally like shuddered with fear. His hands shook, his eyes closed, and he like gasped, like, please don't hurt me again. I was like, oh my God. Like what did I just do? And I picked him up, I put him in the bathtub, I put him to bed, went down to my office. I was crying. I was like, that night I just started asking myself different questions. I was like, I have a degree in sports medicine with a minor in nutrition. So I know everything about the body, how to take care of your body. I did 13 years of martial arts, did a lot of martial arts like you did. And I was like, what, I'm decent in those areas, but why? It's because I learned a curriculum. Like I learned how to do things. Like I didn't go in blindly. And what have I done for fatherhood? What have I done for being a husband or a man? Like nothing, zero, zilch. And that night, I just started a Facebook page because I didn't know what else to do. And I started the Facebook page for me, not for anybody else. And at the time, it was 2011. It wasn't really like social media was like now. I just created that page and I called it the Good Dad Project. I don't know how many people know this, but I was the project. And I just committed. I was like, I'm going to learn something new every day, and I'm just going to post it here, for just for my own accountability and just to share what I'm learning. And I was like really hard on myself when I would post things, pretty authentic. And then a year went by and the page just completely blew up. And I was like, why are people following me? Like I'm a freaking moron. And then I got asked to speak at one of our local churches, one of the biggest local churches, for a moms group of 350 moms. And I'll never forget that phone call. They're like, hey, we're looking for a speaker. We've been following you. We want to see if you want to come out and speak. And I'm like, on what? And she's like, on how to be a good dad. I was like, you got the wrong guy, man. I was like, I am not a good dad. Like I'm trying to, she's like, no, no, no. That's what we love about you actually, is that you're so transparent and authentic about how you're screwing up and like what you're learning. Like that's what we really want to hear. And I was like, I guess I can do that. I don't know. Like, and I did it, and I just totally did it off the cuff, and it went over so well. And then I kept being asked to speak over and over again. I was like, what is happening here? And then a year later, I decided, I was like, well, maybe I'll start a blog, I'll just write about this stuff. And 2 years went by. In 2015, I started a podcast because, quite frankly, I was just burnt out on writing. I was like, maybe I'll just have better conversations with people and figure this out. And again, didn't do the podcast for a following at all. I just was like, maybe I'll just talk to people and figure this out. And I always say this, but I had 10 good ideas for shows. And then after that, I was on God's Good Humor. But that was 11 years ago and 1,500 episodes ago. And, here we are. We've got a fantastic community of dads who do life with us, and still learning, man, to this day. You were on a Q&A with me yesterday as we're talking, and I asked you a really deep question about, like, I don't know how to get through to my 20-year-old. Like, dude, this learning never stops. But that's the story.
Yeah, incredible, incredible journey. So you're actually just a couple of years away. You'll be probably 2,000 conversations around this topic, and that's incredible. How have you evolved? And are there a couple of sort of big epiphanies that you've learned having these conversations? Because it's been a lot of them.
It has been a lot of them. And I look back on I look back on my life as like a 1.0 version of me and a 2.0 version of me. And I still fall into 1.0. But I say this because of what I've learned over the past, gosh, almost 15 years of doing this, is that the valleys are shorter and the peaks are beautiful and the journey is a lot better. But what I have learned is this, is that, in anything that we do, let's take you and I doing martial arts, right? You're a black belt in Taekwondo. I think, what degree are you actually? Wow. Okay. So you do martial arts for that long, and, we wouldn't think that we would go into a martial art tournament or jujitsu tournament or Taekwondo tournament or even something like MMA and be like, well, I'll just go on instincts and see what happens. Like you get pummeled. Like I interviewed Frankie Edgar, who's a UFC Hall of Famer, and we had this conversation. I was like, yeah, I think that's how people go into fatherhood and marriage, is like, I'll just wing it and figure it out. But you take somebody like Frankie, who's been a wrestler since he was 5 years old, and then, now jujitsu and an MMA fighter and a UFC Hall of Famer. Like he didn't get there by accident. He had to work day in and day out, learning different skills on how to do that. And I think the perception of a lot of men out there, and I was included in this, is I shouldn't need help with this. Like fatherhood should come naturally to me. And like, I love my wife, therefore it should just work out. But if you really look at successful marriages, the divorce rate's 50%, But what people don't know is John Gottman, who's been the pioneer of marriage for the past 40 years, really studied couples that actually stay together and why they stay together. And what he found was is the 50% that stay together are actually divided up into three separate camps, and they're all pretty equal. So one third of couples that stay together can actually identify their relationship as working. And I'll tell you why. Working is in they're happy, they're fulfilled, like they're fulfilling each other's needs, they communicate well, there's intimacy, connection, all of those things. The next 33% of people that stay together are more roommate syndrome. So it's like they coexist, they co parent, there's not a whole lot of intimacy. Their conversations are more logistical and managerial. And every day kind of feels like groundhog. And in my book, I kind of call that the drift. And then the last one third of couples that stay together are completely physically and emotionally and mentally disconnected. These are two strangers that live in each other's houses. They have two separate lives. The two factors that Gottman found that people stay together, or it's too financially devastating for us to get divorced right now, or we got to stay together for the kids and they're just waiting for them to move out where they can have an amicable divorce. But if you really do the math, right, of people that walk down the aisle and you get to that one third of camp that finds their relationship fulfilling, is number one, they agree to do the work. They grow together. They're not afraid to go get help. They're not afraid to go get counseling. They know that their marriage is a choice. They know that love is a choice, and they constantly work on it and constantly sharpen it. And they're both committed to doing that. But that percentage is about 12%. And if you think about that success rate with marriage, that's the same success. I've had 37 Navy SEALs come on the podcast. That's the same success rate as a SEAL going through buds. 90% failure rate. And that's about what marriage is, if you really kind of think about it. And so going at it alone or going at it winging it, that has totally changed my perception, because just like Taekwondo for me and you, there's a skill set that you learn to navigate. So that's number one. Number two, what I have found too is that if a man and a woman who are married with kids prioritize their marriage over being parents, and I'm not saying like your kid's got a broken leg, but you have a date night and you go out anyway. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is like, hey, we're the foundation of this house. What is caught, what is, it's not what's taught, it's what's caught. And your kids have a 3D constant movie motion picture to what could be a successful relationship. So if you're both committed to cultivating an extraordinary marriage and communication, you're actually showing your kids what it could be like for them. And you also provide so much more safety. Like even when I ask my kids, I'm like, hey, when you see me and mom love each other, like, what goes through your mind? Like what goes through your heart? And of course they're like, it's gross, it's disgusting. And I'm like, well, good. I'm glad we're grossing you out. Even my 12 and 10-year-old will be like, I don't know, it feels warm. It feels cozy. And when I hear words like that, they feel safe. So when they see mom and dad really love each other, because kids know, man, they know if you're in roommate syndrome, they know if you're disconnected, no matter how much we try to hide it. You're really cultivating a family unit of safety and a family unit of where the kids want to be around. So I think that's another one. And I would say the third one is really, really understanding your wife and kids' three basic needs in a relationship. And I'm not talking about food, shelter, and clothing, but your wife and your kids actually have the same three basic needs, which makes it really easy for us. So a woman you're married to and kids, they need to feel seen, they need to feel heard, and they need to feel safe. Those three things are huge. And that safety button is a big one. Men need to feel respected, appreciated, and we need physical affection. So those are our three needs. And what we usually try to do in relationships is we fulfill each other's needs in our own needs. And we wonder why those things fall flat. So an example of that is a man will try to love his woman very physically without, creating fulfillment in the seen, heard, and safe. And he wonders why is she resistant? Why is she not, leaning in? Why is she not softening? Well, it's because you're probably not fulfilling her needs. And she's trying to fulfill yours by making perhaps you feel seen or heard or whatever. And that's not necessarily what we need. We do need those things, but respect and appreciation go so much further. So it's really understanding like how do we fulfill each other's needs and communicate those needs. I mean, that's just three things, but I could probably give you 20, but those are probably some of the most simple.
Well, I actually like the order, husband, father, leader. And I believe how parents show up and role model for their kids is a gigantic part of developing the kids, which is what you're saying. And something we talked a little bit about yesterday, these unhealthy behaviors that get passed on if we don't address them generationally. And you and I have a lot of similarities in how we grew up, and some other things that are pretty interesting and probably not ideal. But I learned a lot, got a lot of value out of it, and I very quickly got to, again, kicked out of the house beginning of my senior year in high school, got to, this isn't about me at all. And what's that old saying? At 18, every kid thinks that the whole world is thinking about them. By 40, you don't care what anybody thinks about you. By 60, you realize nobody was thinking about you. Um, I I felt, again, pretty quickly they were so locked up in their world, my parents and my extended family, that was like a giant mess, had nothing to do with me. And because I had this outside world of creating value and getting, paid for it, materially, emotionally, spiritually, I couldn't articulate it very well back then, not really as well as I can today. But that felt amazing, and I could trust it. And that helped me get out of it and see that my parents had a hard time raising themselves, let alone the five kids. And there's, I'm sure you've met a lot of people like this too, where they hold on to these resentments and how their childhood was for decades if they ever let go of it. And when we get into this concept of drifting, I think that that internal holding on to those kinds of things, negative self-talk, all of that is a giant part of how I see this concept of drifting. So, what have you learned about breaking these unhealthy generational behaviors so we don't keep passing it on? And I literally see it everywhere because I get to work with so many different families.
Yeah, before we even get into that, I really want to commend dads out there right now because the generation that you and I grew up with, I don't think you and I are that far off in age. Number one, I think they did the best they could with what they had, and I think that they were also raised like my grandfather was, he was in World War II, and he came from, like, he started work in eighth grade. Like, he was a man's man. He was a blue collar worker and one of the greatest freaking men I've ever met in my life. Um, Very affectionate, very loving, very tough though too. And I know that that generation they were tough dudes, and they really viewed themselves as, I'm the provider, right? And I think they didn't really grow up with a whole lot of emotional IQ, just because that really wasn't available to them then. It was a very different time, and our dads, I think, were raised with the same, and they didn't really know any better. I mean, right now we have a smartphone that gives us a window to the world. That if you want to ask, AI or Google, like, how do I be a better dad? The resources are endless now of what you could dive into. Even when I started this work in 2011, there was nothing, hardly anything out there. I tried to find a podcast on the topic, couldn't find one. And so I think the way I want to commend now men and fathers is, you see more dads now in the stands at sporting events than I think you ever have. Like, I go on field trips at my kids' school and you see dads on the field trips. Like, you didn't see dads ever on the field trips. You see dads showing up to school things, like where your kids got like a cool presentation, or like there's a party or like a holiday party or something like that. There are dads there now. So dads, like, what I'm seeing, and I've seen this for a long time, is dads are eager, man. They have a desire. They have a huge intention to show up and break generational patterns. But the gap that I see is, I don't know exactly how to do it. So kind of like comparing this again to like Taekwondo, I see a lot of men who, like, I have so much intention and desire to learn how to defend myself. I really want to learn this, but they can't find the dojo to go to, right? Or they won't enter into the dojo. And the world will tell you, by the way, too, which, don't listen to this, is if you walk into the dojo, you're weak, you're less than. If you need help with this, you're wrong. Like, that's not the case. So I think that's the biggest gap we're seeing right now. But as far as like the generational thing, so I think a lot of it has to do with the narrative and the story that we tell ourselves. So like, for half of my marriage, the reason why half of my marriage and a little bit of my fatherhood journey was disastrous was because it was the story I would tell myself. Like, I would tell my wife all the time. She'd be like, you just don't know how to communicate. I was like, well, I was never taught, so I'm not a good communicator. And, or like, I'd lose my patience with my kids, and Jessica would be like, gosh, you lose your patience with the kids. I was like, well, no one was patient with me. I don't know how to do it. I am not a patient father. And I would like label, and it was when you say things like that to yourself, it becomes a part of your operating system. And the brain is like this beautiful pattern recognition machine. I mean, and it's quite frankly, it's not that smart. You have to override it so much. Like your brain is there to keep you comfortable and keep you alive, period. And but the brain does this subconsciously. As soon as we say I'm not a patient father, my brain and everybody else's brain will go to all the history, and it'll track patterns of like, yeah, you did this, you did this, you did this, your childhood was this, this, and this, and it just ingrains into our psyche and our operating system even more. But when you say things like, I'm not a patient father right now, however, I'm learning the skills to become more patient. As soon as you say that, but or however, the brain goes into a different direction and it starts to look at solutions and possibilities. So, like, if you want to change the narrative and if you want to break generational patterns, it's got to start with how you talk to yourself. And if you're talking to yourself and identifying yourself as this person who's broken because of your past or because of your dad or because of your upbringing, that will become your future. Like, no doubt about it. No matter how bad you don't want it, the brain will focus on our words. Words create a world, and what we focus on grows and what we focus on expands, even if it's bad. So, like, I'll give you an example. When I tell this to guys, I'm like, well, what are you talking about? I was like, well, here's an example. I was like, for right now in this moment, I don't want you to think of a giant pink elephant wearing a blue hat in your front yard. No matter what you do, I don't want you to think about that. And I was like, what are you thinking about? And they're like, I'm thinking of a pink elephant with a blue hat in my front yard. I was like, that's because the brain doesn't hear, don't think about it. It can't help but think about it. So whatever you focus on grows, whatever you focus on expands. So if you're thinking about possibilities and learning, that's what you're going to go towards. If you're thinking about the other narrative, you'll move more towards that. So one other thing I want to say about generational patterns is no matter what your history is, no matter what, like, listen, like if a dummy like me can break generational patterns, like I honestly think anybody can do it because I'm an idiot. I really am. I'm a moron when it comes to this, but I'm a moron who's learning over and over and over again. And I still make these stupid mistakes from time to time. Luckily, it's not as often and I recover faster, but like it's not over for you. And even if your kids are older, like kids, believe it or not, whether they are connected to you or not, or they're deep down, they are your biggest cheerleader. They want you to step up. And I think people would be surprised at how resilient and forgiving kids are. So like it's like I didn't know my dad for 30 years of my life. And it was crazy. As soon as he owned it and apologized and we moved forward, it was like, awesome. This is great. Like you would think like I'd hold a grudge. I really don't. But your kids are your biggest fans, man. They really want what's best for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fantastic. The concept of drifting, that started really resonating me when I read the book, Outwitting the Devil, the Napoleon
Yeah.
Hill manuscript that Sharon Lecter published. And you're describing in chapter 3, when I read it, sort of a version of what that can look like. Let's talk about that for a minute here. And I think that's a big part of breaking the generational unhealthy behaviors is understanding the drift and what it means. And I've been thinking about it for a really long time because I read the book a long time ago. And I think for me personally, I think I drift less than most, but it's the single biggest opportunity for me to create even more value in the world. So talk about the drift a little bit. And I think this can be really helpful in terms of breaking those patterns.
I got that concept actually from that book. I mean, that book was so enlightening to me. And I'll never forget, I think this quote actually came from the book that the definition of hell is meeting the man that you could have become when you're on your deathbed. And I'll never forget hearing that from a podcast guest on another show. And I was getting ready to interview him and I wanted to hear a show that he was on. And he said that quote. I still remember exactly where I was in my car and the left hand turn that I was making because I felt like the world stopped when I heard that quote. And that's actually how I open up the book because the last thing I think a man wants to do is live with regret and live with things unsaid, coulda, woulda, shouldas. And the drift, what it really feels like for men, and I see most men who come to our table and do life with us in our programs, they're in that place. And what does it feel like? And here's the scariest: it's the most sinister thing. It's almost like having slow metastasizing cancer that you can't detect. And suddenly you wake up, 3, 5, 10 years and you're like, holy crap, like, wait a second. I was just living day by day, just trying to get through the day. And so much has slipped through my fingers. It is so sinister how it happens. But the drift is, so let's take an average man, right? Goes to high school, maybe he goes to college, goes into his career. Something happens to a man after he goes into his career and he gets married, especially, and especially when he starts having kids. He starts excluding everything out of his life except for two areas: work and family. That becomes his life, and that becomes the beginning of the drift. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't spend time with your family and you shouldn't work, but when that is your only two worlds, life can feel pretty darn empty, especially if you want to show up and you want to break generational patterns and you're in your family. The family portion of our life can feel like the most defeating. It can actually feel like the heaviest lift because we don't have the blueprint, we don't have the template, and we don't have community. That's the other thing that happens to a man. A lot of guys out there, and me included in this camp, holy cow, I used to take so much pride in, like, I can go at it alone. I'm the lone wolf. The lone wolf is strong, stoic. He can handle anything. It's actually not the case for the lone wolf. The lone wolf actually dies. That is his end result, because packs thrive and lone wolves die. So the lone wolf, two things happen. He either loses the pack, maybe he got injured or something like that, but he's lost his pack. He's going to be taken down by a bigger predator, or he's just simply going to die. Or the lone wolf on his own accord will leave the pack and go off by himself because he knows that he's about to die. But either way, the lone wolf dies. So what happens to guys out there is, after we graduate college, we're in the workplace, we're surrounded physically by people. We have a lot of acquaintances, a lot of shallow relationships, and usually every question that can be answered with another man is good, fine, or busy, right? How's work? Oh, it's busy. How's the family? Oh, they're fine. How's your wife? Oh, she's good. And we don't have these deep conversations like we do in our programs, or even in really good, solid friendships. Stephen Mansfield wrote a book not too terribly long ago called Mansfield's Book of Manly Men. And I believe he's in his 70s now, but he's been in men's work for a very long time. And he calls these relationships rusty relationships. And they're rusty because they're shallow. They don't provide a whole lot of depth. And no matter how many people you might be surrounded by or how many acquaintances you have, 70% of men report being lonely, and over 85% of men don't have a 3 a.m. friend that they could call in an emergency. And those stats really tell us the truth, that men are going at this alone, and that, the drift feels very lonely. And we also feel like we're the only ones who have our problems. Take into account this too, and you probably know this from working with CEOs and people who have been in jobs. 82% of men go to a job every day that they either dislike to some degree or absolutely despise. It just completely steals their soul. So when a man is doing a job, 8 out of 10 men do a job that they don't like or despise. That's not very fulfilling. Add to it, he doesn't really know what to do. But here's the good news: he really wants to know what to do. But like I said, the gap is he doesn't know how to do it. Those two areas of his life feel quite empty. And the world keeps telling men, white knuckle it, put your head down, don't feel your feelings. If you need help, you're weak, and just keep going, man. And that is the drift. And it feels so freaking empty to men. And they're scratching their head. They're like, isn't there a better way? I don't know what the way is, but isn't there a better one? And the answer to that question is yes, there is a better way, but that's the drift in my experience.
Yeah, and back to this internal talk. So if you heard someone talking to one of your kids or any kid the way you talk to yourself, how would you react to it? And I've been paying a lot of attention to that in the last number of years. I'll never say, "Wow, that was terrible. I made a mistake." I'll just go, "What did I learn, and how can I create even more value going forward?" And for me, when I practice the drift, it's thinking about the concept and improving on it, so I'm drifting less. What's the objectively measurable value I want to create, whether it's money, material, it's emotional energy, which is the scarcest commodity on the planet to me, or it's the connectedness on the spiritual side. Anything that takes me off of that, I just push it away and I keep focusing on it. What did I learn about how it took me off the drift? And how do I get back to actually creating that value? In this concept of going through life where, I don't like my job, I don't like this, I don't like everything else. I've found, and I'm curious to get your take on it, when my emotional energy is on a scale from 1 to 10, on 9 or 10, I love everything that I'm doing, like literally everything. That's why I call it the scarcest commodity. I'd rather live, half as long on 9 or 10 than twice as long on 1 or 2. It supercharges everything we do. So that's kind of my version of it and where that goes. And I know you're really into fitness and you understand all of that. I spend a fair amount of time every day. It's like breathing for me. And thanks for the compliment. I'm actually about 14 years older than you. Um, I'm 65.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
Um, but it's again, move right, nourish right, recover right. I mean, again, it's so important to do it, and probably 98% of Americans get it completely wrong. But this concept of self-talk, I made a mistake, I messed up. For me, it's better just to say, okay, here's what happened. What did I learn? And how can I do this more effectively to create more value going forward? That feels healthier to me. I'm talking to myself the way I want adults to talk to kids. Does this resonate? Because it's a big deal.
Oh my gosh. Like, so first of all, I remember you sharing that quote of I'd rather live in a 9 or 10 for less time than a 1 or 2. And I think that that is so true. I think when a man is really in touch with his emotional state, because we, what we're taught to do, and by the way, you can do this in a really masculine way, which is the example that you just gave is asking yourself better questions. And but a lot of guys are like, well, if I get in touch with my emotions, isn't that like an estrogenic weak sponge? Like is that just like no, it's not. It's actually you're enhancing your emotional IQ. I had a really early on, I think he was episode 28. I was like a raving fan of this guy who came on the podcast. And it was the first book that I read that I think completely and totally changed my mindset. I'll never forget it. I think it was 2014. I came across this book by Mark Devine. Mark Devine is a former Navy SEAL commander, one of the most highly decorated Navy SEALs, just an absolute machine. His nickname in Buds was the Cyborg. So like he was like unstoppable, but like as an early kid, he really got into mindset. Like even as like a 9-year-old kid, he'd go on like massive hikes and in the mountains and stuff like this, just on his own, like just exploring. And he really got into mindset. And he knew early on that he was going to do something that probably was require him to get through his, to be very resilient, emotionally high emotional IQ. And he said buds for him was hard, but he was able to get through it just fine because he was able to focus on all the things that he had learned. But he wrote a book called Unbeatable Mind. And I will never forget that book. I probably listened to that book over the years, probably 15 times. And I used to listen to it all the time as I cut my lawn back then. And when I reached out to Mark and asked him to come on the podcast, I literally thought like, oh my gosh, this is like the freaking man of, that I've ever wanted to talk to. And Mark said this quote, I'll never forget it, even though it was like 11 years ago. He said, the quality of your life and the quality of your relationships, even the relationship with yourself resides in the quality of your questions. He's like, so if you're asking yourself when you screw up, okay, I failed. What did I learn and what am I going to do different? Most people don't do that. What we do, men don't dig themselves a 6-foot grave when bad things happen. They dig themselves like a 20-foot. So the 6-foot grave really looks like I just screwed up, but they keep digging it because like they keep saying like, why can't I be a more patient father? Why can't I be a better husband? Why can't I, make more money in my job? Why can't I find a job that I enjoy? And one thing Mark said is if you're ever starting a question after a failure or even not a failure with why can't I, stop, because you are burying yourself even further into that narrative. So like what men will do, and by the way, the brain, like I said, not so smart. It's like the Google search bar. And I've actually done this myself. I've typed into the search bar of my brain and on Google, why can't I be a better father? And Google will tell me all the reasons why I can't, or the reasons why I can't, and all the symptoms that men feel out there. But if I rephrase that question with how might I be a more patient father, well, then all of a sudden it goes into solution mode. And when we start asking ourselves better questions, we're going to get better solutions. And when we have better solutions, the quality of our life goes up. And then we can operate in a better way. And we can operate in a learning environment. But what men also do that dig that 20-foot grave even deeper is we don't have the emotional IQ. So like men will usually if they have a bad moment with their kids, let's take the example of that when I spanked my kid. That night I was lucky enough, and I'm a faith-based person. I don't think I was alone in that office. I think God was really nudging me and helping me ask better questions. But what a lot of guys do is they'll come down so hard on themselves with guilt and shame. So they'll feel that emotion. And then after that emotion, they feel anger, right? Because anger is a secondary emotion. But what happens in that place too is that when you feel those emotions, there's also shame around even feeling those emotions. So, how many times we said this? I'm angry and I'm angry that I'm angry, or I'm frustrated and I'm even more frustrated that I'm even frustrated. So it's like this double whammy of painful emotions, and we don't know how to get out of it. And so what we do is we just constantly go in this loop, and then we identify ourselves as this person, this identity who constantly screws up, who's less than, who's weak, versus the guy who's like, time out. Exactly what Lee just said, time out. What happened here? What did I learn? How can I be different? What's the solution? That question alone is a launching pad for a way better journey than the other way.
Everything you're saying there to me is the most powerful weapon of the drift. And it
Yeah.
constantly, sort of coming in. So imagine how much value you could create if you didn't give into that. And that's why, in the book, they talk about the concept of, 2% can never be touched by it, 98% are doomed. I don't believe that. I think you can work your way out of it and jump into that 2% and let's make it 10%, let's make it 20%. But it's such a powerful concept. If you can stop it, you can create so much value in yourself, with your family, with communities, like everything else that goes with it, right?
Yeah. Totally agree, man. I've never actually heard, I wish I actually included that in my book that, yeah, I do have a whole chapter on the power of your questions is, or the quality of your questions is quality of your life. But that is the bookmark in that. That is the hard stop of the drift is asking yourself better questions.
Yeah, 100%. I wish we had about 3 more hours because I've got a number of topics I want to dig into, but I would like to touch on a couple.
Yeah.
One is the environment we create for our kids at home that will cause human nature, them essentially to move in a direction of creating more and more value and being amazingly fulfilled in the life that they create. And the other one is filters. And how do we communicate the right filters for family members? Because when I look at the world, is it really as bad as our elected leaders want us to believe it is? So we panic and do stupid things? Or is it better than that? And so many things are amazing, but you'd never know when you watch social media and all the gimmicks to get people to react and do things. So let's start first with the environment we create for our kids. My environment was you're out of the house, go figure it out. There's no financial backstop. And I figured it out. And it's been an amazing life. And it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Today, parents would say that's impossible. We can't do that. And we're making it easier and easier for the kids while we're telling them you can do anything you want to do. While at the same time, we're lowering expectations about what we truly believe they can actually do. And I think it comes down to the environment. What are your thoughts on the environment we create for our kids that will effectively launch them into being what I'd like to say is amazing value creating adults?
I think that's such a good question. Number one, I think there's a couple of concepts that I really want to talk about here. Number one is, and I'll just share this. I think when it comes to that safety button with your kids, like we can really jump over the line and over comfort them, right? We can make life too easy for them. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I'm working on as a dad is because of the childhood I came from is I always want to overserve my kids. And I always have to remember I have to manufacture adversity in a safe place where they can fail and then have a conversation of what could we have done different. So I'll share this first. My goal with all my boys is to always be their 3 a.m. call. And in the past year, I've been their 3 a.m. call twice. Luckily, it's never been for drugs or alcohol, but even on the real ones with John Bernthal, I said, hey, at some point, you have to raise your kids in an environment where you are not necessarily the golden parachute, but you are the safe haven when they're going through something really, really dark, because our kids are going to go through really dark times. You and I grew up in a family where darkness was something you didn't talk about, and you probably hid it even more. And that only compounds, drugs, alcohol, porn, or whatever it is that they're getting into. And so, like, I love to have conversations, and going back to questions, creating an environment of psychological safety where my kids can come to me in really dark times or where they failed at something, and they feel actually not only safe to do it, but they're motivated to do it. So I'll give you an example of this. I love questions, and I learned this from Mark. Is I ask my kids 3 questions every single day, and I'll give you the psychology behind it. And I change up the questions, but the theme is always usually the same. So instead of how was your day or how was school, say what was the best part of your day and tell me why it was so meaningful to you. Or something like that. Something made you laugh today. Why was it so funny? Or who'd you sit with at lunch and what characteristics do you appreciate about this friend of yours? Like just getting them to a high point moment of connection where they have to share a story and not one word creates like a beautiful, safe environment where you get to celebrate things with them. The second question is the psychological safety one. So I always ask, I'm like, hey, what did you fail at today? Or what'd you learn? Or what challenge did you go through? And how did you get through it? What'd you learn? And I'll tell you, there's always a little bit of fear in a kid. Like if I got a D or an F on the test, I was like, my mom can never find out about this because I'm going to be blasted with shame, guilt, blame, and pain, right? And kids will just hide things even more. I mean, it's kind of like the same thing with the speed. You get 3 speeding tickets in a year, and that's not going to stop somebody from speeding. They're going to go buy a radar detector, right? They're not going to slow down. But so, like, let's take that second question, and this is the process that I like to take my kids through. So if my kid gets in the car, I'm like, hey, what'd you fail at today? And I'll get this look of a deer in the headlights, and I'll encourage, and I'll be like, come on, man, looks like there's something. Like, what do you got? And I'll be playful about it. And they'll be like, Dad, I got an F on the science test today. And here's my dad brain, right? Because we still have a default dad brain. I'm sitting there thinking, like, I knew you weren't studying. You were on your phone. You were on TikTok. You were wasting your time. I knew you weren't working. Like, that's where I want to go, right? But instead, what I do is I praise them for their courage. I'm like, ooh, man. I was like, dude, I was like, that took a lot of courage to tell dad that. I was like, man, when I was your age, man, I would hide that stuff all day long. I was like, but let's talk about this. I was like, so what do you think happened? And usually that's a really broad question. I'll get a lollygag answer, but that's okay. Sometimes I'll get a good one, but I'll always dig deeper on a second question. If they're like, I don't know, I'll be like, oh, well, I'll put it, let's ask this a different way. If you could prepare for this test differently, what would you have done different? Now, me as a man, I immediately want to jump in and tell them everything that they should have done, right? But I don't want to articulate that. I want them to articulate it. And then I'll get a lot of honesty too. Usually, they'll be like, "Well, the test was over 5 chapters. I really only studied like 2, and I did waste a lot of time. I didn't really prepare for it." And I was like, "Okay, well, what would you do different?" And they'll be like, "Well, I don't know. I think I would have studied all 5 chapters. Maybe I would have taken 1 chapter a night for like 5 days. Maybe I would have even gotten up early on the day of the test and just reviewed a couple of things. Or maybe I would have gotten together with a couple buddies and just gone over a few things." And I'm like, dude, that's a solid plan. When's your next test? And they're like, oh, we actually have one next Friday. I'm like, well, man, I was like, the plan you just laid out seems pretty darn solid to me. Like, what would stop you from executing that plan? And they kind of like look at you and they'll be like, well, yeah, really nothing. I'll be like, well, do you think you can go do that? And be like, yeah, well, how can I best support you? I was like, you want me to help you study or do you want me to quiz you or do you want me to just check in on you? Like what feels best to you? And I like using that word, what feels best to you, because kids are feelers and so is your wife. And they'll be like, well, maybe if you could like quiz me the night before a little bit, like we go over it, like that'd be great. I'd be like, awesome, in the calendar, let's do it. And then they come home after that test and they're like all like excited, they got an A or B or they did better. And they come in, there's like, like, hey, what's going on? Dude, I think you got some good news. What's up? What happened? Like, I got a B on the test. I'm like, dude, of course you got a B on the test. I was like, you had a plan. You learned from what you did the first time and you executed the plan. And then they'll look at you and they'll be like, thank you so much for talking to me. And you're like, all I did was ask you some questions, dude. You came up with your own solution. But that is an environment of psychological safety, right? And it's also not free of consequences because the consequence there is I didn't have to ground them. I didn't have to discipline. They got the nasty grade on the test. They're going to have to deal with that, right? They are going to have to deal with that. But that question alone, you get that rep after rep, day after day, you become, and I've always had this code word with my kids. Each one of my kids has a code word that if they're in a bad situation, at any point in time, whether it's 3 a.m. or 3 p.m., call me with a code word or text it to me. I'll tell you there's a family emergency and I'll come get you. And I've had to do that twice in the past year alone, but I always applaud them. I'm like, hey, it took a lot of bravery for you to reach out to me and to share that something wasn't right. And, we'll have a conversation about whatever happened the next day, and it'll be a very fruitful one. It won't be one with blame, shame, and pain. But, creating that psychological safety, because at the end of the day, what I think parents really, really want is that their kids want to be around them as they get older. Like that's really, really important. And then the third and final question I ask them is like, what are you most excited about? Coming up next. Is it this week? Is it tomorrow? What is it? And you'll get something like, hey, track tryouts are tomorrow. I'm really nervous about it, right? But like, as soon as the kid comes home that next day, that's like the Netflix to be continued conversation. That Netflix has always got this thing where no matter what you're watching, they have a hook for you to watch the next episode. And before you know it, you're watching 8 episodes. But the first thing I'm going to ask my kid when he walks through the door is like, dude, bro, like how did track tryouts go? Because an interested dad is the most interesting dad on the block. If you are genuinely interested in very specific things going on with your kids, you are going to become the most fascinating, most interesting dad on the planet. So those are the three questions.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. And the second question I had around filters, we don't have a ton of time to dig into
Yeah.
it, but it is interesting. I think it's important around what are the filters that we help our kids develop and adults in our lives as well. Because I can look at something, for example, mainstream sort of news outlets will report this person unfortunately died, and it's leveraged politically all these different ways. And at the same time, if you go back to 2025, the policies, caused, I think it was about a 21% reduction in the murder rate. So here's over 4,000 people that are otherwise statistically alive that wouldn't have been. That's significant over one person. But if you watch what's going on, you think the world's coming to an end. And it's actually not. So I think filters are wildly important. And I hope at some point I can have you back in the future. We can talk about that in depth as well as all the other stuff in your book around husband, father, leader, what that actually means. But probably in a minute or so, what are your thoughts on creating better filters to see what's really going on in the world, not what the world wants you to think is going on? Does that make sense?
It makes total sense, and I'll make this story really quick. So back in 2020, we had this thing called COVID that happened, right? And everybody was terrified to leave their house, and we couldn't. We were so limited on what we could do, and it was about 2 months of us living in the house, and we got together as a family, and we filtered that experience through all of us, and we're like, all right, so it might be the end of the world. Who knows? We're not really sure. But what would it look like if the Hagners did life different? What if Team Hagner did life different? What if we filtered this through the lens of what can we do and how can we make adventures and memories together versus like live like everybody else? So what we did that summer of 2020 is we created 12 adventures where I took the day off every Wednesday and we went out and did several different things that we could do. We went out on family hikes. We adventured to places that we could. We did picnics out in our backyard. We did some of the simplest things. We went on float trips. In the Midwest, that's a big thing, where you take a raft and you float down a river and you just have a good time. We could do that kind of stuff. And about a year went by, and we created all these memories and photos. And my wife asked me in 2021, "What do you want for Father's Day?" And my answer is always nothing. And but I told her, I was like, you know what I really want? I was like, I want a wall. I want a wall with several pictures of all of our adventures that we did life different during COVID. And Father's Day came and went, and that didn't happen. And I didn't think it would. And little did I know, I went to Vegas in 2021 for some media. Was gone for a week with my oldest son. We came back home. Nobody was home. My wife and the other three kids were out. My son went downstairs, and he came upstairs, and he goes, "Dad, have you been downstairs yet?" And I was like, "No." He's like, "Follow me." I'm going to get emotional even saying this, and I promise I'll be quick. I went downstairs, and my wife put 100 small frames. Man, so powerful. 100 small frames of the simplest moments of Team Hagner during COVID. And in the middle, it said, in the middle of all these frames, she also created like this word thing, this word mural. It said, "Adventure together no matter what." And I freaking cried, man. And I was like, that was like the badass thing that the Hagners did, because while the rest of the world was filtering through a lens of fear, we decided to live life different. And dude, I felt like that was like winning the championship in a UFC fight. It was just awesome. But yeah, that's a quick one.
That's incredible. So beautiful. Larry, if our listeners want to learn more about your work, how to get involved or connect with you, how can they do that?
Sure, I appreciate that. I always say start with the Dad Edge podcast. We got enough podcasts there to last you a long time. If you're curious about questions, I've got 2 free resources for you. If you want to start asking your wife better questions, I call them 25 intimate conversation starters. It's a beautiful PDF, and it even has a little course that teaches you the psychology of generative questions. If you go to thedadedge.com/25 questions, that will give you a PDF of really great questions of you can ask your wife, take her out on a date night, have some fun with it. You'll feel like you're getting to know each other all over again. And then the other free resource I have is I call it questions for the car. This is where you don't have to ask your kids, how was your day? Or how was school? Or how much homework you have? I have 25 questions in 3 different age ranges and on a PDF for you. Ages 5 to 8, 25 questions, 9 to 12, 25 questions, and those teenagers that are really hard to crack the code and get them talking. That PDF and those resources are totally free. If you, for that one, you just go to thedadedge.com/kid questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being here today, Larry.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you.
All right. And this has been the Show Your Value podcast. If you got some value out of today's episode, please like and subscribe. And until next time, show your value to the world.